Now to the latest on Russia's war on Ukraine. Canada is contributing another $60 million in military assistance to Ukraine. Defense Minister Bill Blair said the money will go towards F-16 maintenance and fighter jet training for Ukrainian pilots. That's in addition to the $15 million earmarked by Canada last month for the same efforts. This comes as Donald Trump is leading opposition to Ukraine aid in the U.S. and has suggested Russia should attack NATO countries that don't spend enough for their own defense. For more on this, we have reached retired General Tom Lawson in Ottawa. He's the former chief of the defense staff for the Canadian Armed Forces, and he joins us today, like I say, from Ottawa. So, General Lawson, thank you for joining us. We do appreciate your time today, sir.
Pleasure to be with you.
I want to start by getting your reaction to this news that Canada will be committing $60 million to help train Ukrainian pilots to fly the F-16s. How significant is this?
Well, I mean, in the large scheme of things, with the amount of money that's flowing into Ukraine from EU nations, the U.S., not so much very recently, but also Canada, it's an addition. It's not overly significant, but it does suggest that Canada's support to Ukraine remains completely unweakened at all, unfaltering at a time when other support from North America, largely the United States, may be faltering. And I think it's actually targeted in a very good area.
And I want to talk a little bit more about that in a second, just what we're seeing in the United States. But first, what we've heard from Minister Blair is that these new funds will pay for Ukrainian supplies and equipment. We know that Canada, of course, doesn't operate these F-16s, which are being donated by Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands. So help us understand here just how critical this multilateral coordination is amongst the allies.
Right, it's very important. In fact, in coming months and years, it could be a game changer if the war continues that long, and every sign suggests it will. Right now, about a quarter of the fighters that Ukraine started the war with have been shot down. Russian air defenses have been very successful at keeping those fighters at bay. And so Russia has largely had the upper hand in the air, supporting their troops as they fight on Ukrainian soil. Ukrainians, if they were able to turn that around with F-16 support, would really be able to turn this, I think, because their ground troops would be supported from the air, and Russian aircraft would not have the dominance that they're currently showing. The F-16 is a far more capable aircraft than the Ukrainians have been using to this point. As you said, Canada can't supply any F-16s, but we are supplying training, and now with this announcement, we'll be supplying parts, maintenance, weapons, weapons stations, and all of those things that help these aircraft remain airborne.
And General Lawson, of course, you mentioned just a minute ago that it does seem as if support in the United States is waning. We are waiting to see whether there will be more American dollars going towards the war effort. How important, then, does it become for other allies, whether that be Canada or in Europe, to step up what it is contributing to the Ukrainians?
Really important. You know, when we go right back to first principles, Ukraine is a democratic, modern, sovereign nation that is leaning towards the West. Sure, it's had difficulties, post-Soviet difficulties with its economy, with corruption, but it is showing a correct arc towards the West, and that's the first thing to take into consideration. The second is that it's suffered now two brutal invasions by the Russians, one in 2014 into Crimea, and now this one that's been going on for almost exactly 2 years, a war that's brutal, illegal, and steps up to the level of criminal as well. And finally, EU nations and NATO nations are not showing any faltering in their support. So at a time when it may look like U.S. Support is faltering, this vote of support from Canada at that very time suggests that other international nations, even across large oceans, are very supportive of Ukraine.
Hearing you say that the Europeans are not faltering in their support, I want to get your thoughts on some new comments that we heard today from NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. He is saying, of course, this is in reaction to what we've heard from former President Donald Trump, that Europe should not be going it alone here, that they cannot defend Europe. The EU can't defend all of Europe on its own. What then are they to do? What are other NATO allies to do if that is the position here, that Europe is not capable of defending itself on its own?
Well, I think the Secretary General makes a very good point. The U.S. has been the leader of NATO for 60-some years now, and that has not changed so long as a leader doesn't come into the United States that wants to change that. But the Secretary General only has one vote or one voice in this whole issue. If a president comes in like President Trump and decides to remove American support from NATO, then these European nations and Canada will be left alone to decide on the way ahead. So I think that while he wants to make it very clear that the United States remains the most important member of NATO, the converse argument is that they may not be there in the long run, maybe even a year from now, depending on how that goes. So it is an important point for the European nations to continue to strengthen their investments in their own defense.
Of course, there will be another meeting of NATO defense ministers in Brussels tomorrow. What do you expect those closed-door conversations might be like?
Right. So I think this Ukraine Defense Contact Group preceding that is a very important thing. Gives defense ministers and secretaries a chance to show solidarity. And I think the United States, although they're not bringing any new funding to the table, they will point to the fact that a package just went through for $60 billion, just went through the Senate. It's going to find all kinds of trouble in the House and Congress, but it went through the Senate, and largely the American administration and American population is supportive of continuing this. So that will lead into the themes that will be discussed throughout the ministerial meetings that will oversee the other meetings going on at NATO, including the military committee, through the coming days.
Okay. Retired General Tom Lawson, thank you. We appreciate your time today, sir.
Thanks for having me.